It was 11:15 p.m. on a cold, quiet Wednesday night in Toledo, Ohio. The city had gone still, the streets nearly deserted except for the occasional late-shift worker or a lone car rolling past shuttered storefronts. Lieutenant Colonel Adrienne Wallace drove through the empty streets in her black, government-issued SUV, the vehicle humming steadily beneath her. She had just wrapped up a long strategy meeting at a military base 2 hours south. The day had been full, but not exhausting. Routine, in the way high-level service can become when done with discipline. Adrienne didn't rush, she didn't fidget, she drove with calm precision, her eyes focused, her mind already transitioning toward home. A soft hum escaped her lips, almost involuntarily, matching the rhythm of the tires against the asphalt. Her SUV, with modest tint and no flash, mirrored her demeanor, clean, capable, and discreet. Just another car on just another night. But several blocks away, Sergeant Daniel Mercer sat slouched in the front seat of a patrol cruiser, parked in the dark corner of a closed diner lot. Boredom clung to him like his stale uniform. He sipped lukewarm coffee, scrolling his phone with one hand while scanning the road with the other. Then he saw her. The unfamiliar SUV caught his attention, not for anything wrong, just for being different. Different was enough. He straightened, tossed the coffee cup into the footwell, and flipped on the cruiser's lights. Red and blue erupted behind Adrienne's rearview mirror. She reacted instantly, no panic, no hesitation. Her hand moved calmly to the signal. She pulled over. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened. A shift had begun. It wasn't the crash of metal or screeching brakes. It was subtler and far more dangerous. A collision of authority, ego, and quiet strength was about to unfold. The red and blue lights reflected in the side mirrors, dancing across the pavement like distant warning flares. Lieutenant Colonel Adrienne Wallace eased her black SUV to the shoulder, parked with quiet precision, and placed both hands visibly on the steering wheel. Her eyes flicked to the mirror. She wasn't nervous, but something felt off. She'd driven cleanly, signaled properly, and stayed within the speed limit. Still, the cruiser behind her had pulled out fast. No siren at first, just urgency in motion. Behind her, the squad car door slammed. A tall figure emerged, rigid posture, flashlight already in hand, the other resting near his holster. He didn't approach the passenger side. He came straight to her window. No greeting, no explanation. "License and registration," he said flatly, shining the light directly into her eyes. Adrienne rolled her window down halfway. Her voice was even. "Officer, may I ask why I was stopped?" "You were drifting between lanes," the officer replied, tone sharp. "Didn't signal. Looked like you might have been drinking." Her brow lifted slightly. "I wasn't," she replied with calm certainty. He ignored her. "License and registration," he repeated, louder this time. Without arguing, Adrienne moved slowly and carefully, reaching into the glove compartment to retrieve her documents. As she handed them over, she added, "This is a government vehicle. I'm a federal employee." Mercer glanced at her ID, eyebrows raising slightly. "Military?" He smirked. "Doesn't mean you're above the law." "I never said I was," she answered, his voice turned harder. "Step out of the vehicle." Adrienne blinked, controlled. "Excuse me?" "I said step out of the car." "I'm doing a sobriety test." She didn't move. Her jaw flexed, but her tone stayed professional. "On what grounds?" "I've cooperated. I'm not intoxicated. I'd like to know the reason." Mercer stepped in closer, posture tense. "Now you're refusing a lawful order?" "I'm not refusing," she replied. "I'm asking for clarification." He didn't like that. Without another word, he reached out and yanked the door open himself. Still, Adrienne didn't flinch. She simply reached over and pressed the record button on her phone. Then, holding it in one steady hand, she said clearly, "Just so we're clear, this conversation is now being recorded." For a brief moment, Mercer paused. His eyes flicked to the phone. There was hesitation in his face, but only for a second. Then it was gone. "Out. Now," he ordered again. Adrienne stepped out slowly, upright and composed. She wasn't wearing her uniform, but something in the way she stood, straight spine, steady eyes, spoke of discipline, authority. She wasn't trying to intimidate. She didn't need to. Mercer made her walk a line under the streetlights, perform balance tests, recite backwards. like she was some weekend drunkard. She passed each one effortlessly, no stumbles, no slurred words. Still, he scribbled on his notepad and handed her a citation. Failure to stay in your lane. Adrienne looked at the paper, then at Mercer. She didn't argue, she didn't roll her eyes. But the way she met his gaze, it wasn't defiance, it was something colder, more precise, a quiet warning. She got back into her car and drove away without another word. Mercer stood there for a moment, satisfied with himself. Another driver checked, another order followed. In his mind, that was all it was. He had no idea that the woman he'd just pulled over wasn't just a military officer, but a lieutenant colonel with a Bronze Star, 2 overseas deployments, and a spotless record of service under fire. And she had just filmed the entire stop. This wasn't over, it was only beginning. Back at the precinct, Sergeant Daniel Mercer dropped into his usual seat in the break room, body cam charging silently in the locker bay. The night shift was winding down. He tossed his ticket pad on the table like a finished meal and leaned back with a satisfied grunt. A few officers stood nearby, laughing over stale vending machine snacks. Mercer raised his voice just enough to be heard. Had a lady try to pull rank on me tonight, he said, chuckling, flashed some government ID like I was supposed to salute her or something. Officer Diaz looked up from his coffee. Government ID? Mercer nodded. Said she was military. Lieutenant Colonel something, Wallace, I think. Diaz's expression changed, subtle but enough. He put his coffee down. Wait, Adrienne Wallace? Mercer smirked. Yeah, you know her? Diaz paused. She spoke at the academy last year. Logistics command out of Fort Wayne. Bronze Star, 2 tours. She's not just military, she's the real deal. Mercer shrugged. Doesn't matter who she is. She was driving like she owned the road. I don't care if she's a general, on the street, on the law. But Diaz didn't smile. He just looked at Mercer a moment longer, then walked off, leaving an odd silence in his wake. For Mercer, the encounter was over. Another stop logged, another ticket filed. He didn't review his footage, didn't even think about the fact that she'd said she was recording him. He'd done this 100 times, issue, log, move on. As far as he was concerned, she'd been mouthy and he'd put her in her place. Across town, the atmosphere was different. Adrienne sat in her office at Fort Wayne, the morning sun just beginning to filter in through the slats in her blinds. Her uniform hung pressed on a nearby rack. On the screen before her, the video from the night before played back in crisp, quiet detail. Every word, every motion, every cold, clipped command. She leaned back in her chair, her hands folded, expression unreadable. Her aide, Sergeant Daniel, stepped in. Ma'am, you good? She nodded. I'm handling it. He hesitated, then closed the door behind him. I saw the video. She didn't speak at first, Daniels continued carefully. You want me to call the base legal office? Already done? You sure you want to take this public? Adrienne looked at the paused frame on her screen, Mercer's hand near his gun. The flashlight in her eyes, the expression on his face, like she was something to manage, not someone to respect. I'm not looking for drama, she said quietly. I'm looking for accountability. She wasn't angry in the way people usually meant. It wasn't fire or rage. It was cold clarity, the kind honed over decades of leadership and watching people like her, especially women of color, walk on eggshells just to survive encounters like this. She wasn't just thinking of herself. She was thinking of every soldier she'd mentored who kept their mouths shut because they didn't want to make trouble. Every black woman who'd told her in quiet corners how they'd been dismissed, disrespected, or treated like threats. This stop wasn't just personal, it was familiar. And this time, she wasn't letting it slide. She reached for her phone and made the next call, then another. By noon, she'd submitted a formal complaint to the Inspector General's office. Attached the video, noted the date, the time, the location. Every detail logged with precision. She didn't call the media. She didn't tweet a clip. She followed the chain of command, quietly, firmly, legally, because this wasn't about spectacle, it was about principle. And the war she was preparing for now wouldn't be fought overseas. It would be fought in court, and she was already winning. 3 days passed before Sergeant Mercer heard anything. The morning started like any other, his usual coffee, his usual locker, his usual attitude. He hadn't watched the body cam footage, he hadn't needed to. He'd filed the ticket, logged the stop, and moved on. As far as he was concerned, it was done, until the envelope showed up. It was sitting on his desk when he returned from patrol. Thin, plain, stamped with internal delivery tags. His name was typed on the front. He tore it open in the hallway, expecting some updated memo from traffic enforcement. It wasn't. Inside was a formal notice. Civil complaint filed. Lieutenant Colonel Adrienne Wallace via Sergeant Daniel Mercer. Allegations included unlawful detainment, abuse of authority, civil rights violation. He stood frozen for a moment, the paper limp in his hands. No way, he muttered under his breath. No way this holds up. But when he walked into the bullpen, the air felt different. A few officers glanced up, then quickly looked away. Others whispered quietly by the water cooler. Someone closed a locker door a little too quickly. He wasn't the untouchable veteran anymore. Something had cracked. Behemmed reading called him into his office. The blinds were drawn. The door shut behind them with a soft but deliberate click. "We need to talk," Reading said, motioning to the chair across from his desk. Mercer sat down, arms crossed, jaw tight. "Is this about the traffic stop?" Reading leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "You know damn well it is. Do you even realize who she is?" "She acted like she was royalty," Mercer snapped. "Tried to tell me how to do my job." "She's not just anyone," Reading said. Voice lower now. "She's a lieutenant colonel, Bronze Star, served in 2 combat zones, logistics command at Fort Wayne. She trains field officers, testifies before DC committees, runs emergency response drills. Her reputation's clean. You treated her like a hostile because she asked a question." Mercer's voice dropped. "I didn't lay a hand on her. I didn't arrest her. I followed procedure." Reading shook his head. "That's not how it's going to look. Not with both cameras rolling. Not with a federal complaint already filed. And not with her lawyer breathing down our necks." Mercer bristled. "So what, we roll over because she has rank?" Reading stared at him. "No, Dan, but we don't get to act like nothing happened either. This isn't going away." Across town, Adrienne wasn't resting either. She didn't need the press. She didn't want a spotlight. What she wanted was accountability. Her legal team had already reviewed the footage, cataloged every moment, the flashlight in her face, the refusal to answer her questions, the door yanked open, the way his hand hovered by his holster, not because she posed a threat, but because she dared to ask why her attorney Delaney Price had experience in federal oversight cases. After reviewing the footage for the 3rd time, she looked at Adrienne and said simply, "We can win this." Adrienne nodded. She wasn't after revenge. She didn't want Mercer fired just to prove a point. She wanted something bigger. She wanted policy reviewed, training addressed, patterns acknowledged. She wanted something on the record that said this was not okay. Because if it could happen to her, a decorated officer in a government vehicle, completely compliant, then what chance did others have? The paper trail was growing, the legal wheels were turning, and Mercer, for the first time in his career, wasn't holding the power. The courthouse was unusually full for a midweek civil case. No reporters yet, no headlines, just people, quiet, watchful, curious. Uniforms dotted the room, military personnel from Fort Wayne seated in rows alongside local officers from the Toledo precinct. Soldiers in press service dress sat shoulder to shoulder with civilians in sweaters and winter coats. The air was heavy, not with noise, but with unspoken weight. Everyone could feel it. Sergeant Daniel Mercer was already seated at the defendant's table, his lawyer, Charles Brenner, beside him. Mercer looked stiff, lips tight, jaw clenched. His eyes flicked toward the entrance now and then, impatient, annoyed, waiting. Then she walked in. Lieutenant Colonel Adrienne Wallace entered through the double doors in full formal uniform. Every ribbon, every insignia, every earned distinction placed with precision. Her posture was flawless, not because she was putting on a show, but because this was who she was. Disciplined, measured, respectful, and completely unafraid. Mercer turned his head and his expression faltered just for a second. The smirk vanished, the confidence drained. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time seemed to understand he hadn't just pulled over some woman that night. He'd pulled over a leader, a soldier, someone who had earned everything he wore. The judge entered, a murmur passed through the room, then silence. "Colonel Wallace," the judge said, glancing briefly at her uniform, "thank you for your service. You may begin." Adrienne stood and walked to the witness stand with the same quiet strength she used when leading troops through danger zones. No fear, no rush, just steady presence. Her attorney, Delaney Price, stepped forward. "Lieutenant Colonel Wallace," she began, "can you describe what happened on the night of January 17th? Adrienne's voice was clear and calm. "I was driving back from a base meeting at the Indiana Guard Reserve approximately 11:15 p.m. when I was stopped by Sergeant Mercer on Reynolds Road. I was not swerving, I was not speeding, I had signaled my turns and remained within my lane. I complied with the stop immediately." Her tone was clinical, but not cold. She spoke like someone giving a mission briefing. "Truth first, no theatrics." Pete continued. "Did you at any point refuse to cooperate?" "No." "Did you raise your voice, threaten, or resist?" "No." "Did you inform Sergeant Mercer of your position and vehicle status?" "Yes." "I stated that I was a federal employee driving a government vehicle." The courtroom was still. Even the pens of court reporters seemed to slow. "Why did you begin recording the encounter?" Price asked. Adrienne's answer was steady. "Because experience has taught me that staying silent doesn't always protect you. I wanted an accurate record of what was happening. Not for retaliation, but for clarity." "Price, let's show the footage." The screen lit up. First, the video from Adrienne's phone. Steady, close, her voice even, Mercer's tone sharp and escalating without provocation. Then Mercer's body cam footage. The jury watched as he barked commands, yanked the door open, hovered his hand near his weapon despite no threat being present. They watched Adrienne perform every test perfectly, watched her face remain calm, watched Mercer write the ticket anyway. They stepped aside. The judge nodded toward Brenner. He rose slowly. "Lieutenant Colonel Wallace," he said, attempting politeness. "Isn't it possible that Sergeant Mercer was simply doing his job, that he was being cautious?" Adrienne didn't flinch. Caution should not look like intimidation. Could he have been concerned for public safety? "I was not endangering anyone," Brenner pushed. "You recorded the encounter before it became hostile. Why?" "Because women like me are taught to be prepared. I didn't want an argument. I wanted documentation." He paced slightly. "So you don't believe police officers should use discretion in stops?" "I believe discretion should be guided by professionalism. Not personal bias, not ego. That badge is not permission, it is responsibility." The judge paused, briefly glancing over the jury. That answer had landed. No. It was Mercer's turn. He didn't take the stand. His attorney advised against it. But the prosecutor still addressed him during questioning. "Sergeant Mercer," she asked from across the room, "why did you order her out of the car?" Mercer shifted in his seat. "She seemed suspicious." "Did she disobey you?" "She questioned me." "Is that against the law?" "No." "Did she raise her voice?" "No." "Did she threaten you?" "No." "Then why escalate the situation?" Mercer hesitated. No answer. The prosecutor didn't let up. "Did you know she was a lieutenant colonel at the time?" "No." "And if you had?" A beat passed. Then Mercer spoke, softer than before. "I might have. Handled it differently." The room went still. That was it. The unspoken truth laid bare. He hadn't seen her as someone worthy of respect, until her rank made him rethink it, until her status forced him to consider the weight of his own behavior. And now, with her medals shining under the courtroom lights and the entire room watching, the power dynamic had finally, visibly reversed. 3 days later, the jury returned. The courtroom was quieter now. Fewer uniforms, fewer spectators. The buzz had faded into a low hum of anticipation. No media frenzy, no dramatic build-up, just the heavy breath before justice speaks. Adrienne sat beside her attorney, hands folded, expression unreadable. She had said all she needed to say. The rest was in their hands. Sergeant Mercer sat across the aisle, stiff in his chair. His tie looked tighter than before. He hadn't spoken to the press. He hadn't spoken much to anyone. Around him, silence had become familiar. In the halls of his precinct, laughter dimmed when he walked by. Conversations paused. The look in his colleagues' eyes had changed, from deference to doubt. He could feel it even here, in the stillness of the courtroom. Judge Cynthia Morales entered with quiet authority. She took her seat and glanced at the foreperson, who stood. In the case of Wallace versus Mercer, we, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff. The words fell like stone. Mercer flinched, just slightly. Adrienne didn't move. The judge continued. The court finds that Sergeant Daniel Mercer violated the plaintiff's civil rights during an unlawful stop. His actions did not meet the standards of conduct required by his department or the Constitution. This verdict will be recorded in public record and submitted to the Department of Justice, as well as the Toledo Police Department, for policy review and training reform. She turned to Mercer. There will be no criminal charges filed at this time. However, the plaintiff is awarded $35,000, 0 cents in civil compensation. The judgment stands. There was no applause, no outcry, just the rustle of paper and a soft exhale from somewhere in the gallery. Justice had arrived, not with thunder, but with quiet clarity. Mercer's lawyer leaned in and whispered, "We'll appeal." But even his voice lacked conviction. The weight had already fallen. Adrienne stood slowly. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. Her uniform was pressed, her posture perfect, her silence louder than any victory speech. She didn't nod to the judge or the jury or even the cameras that had begun flashing outside. She nodded to herself. A simple acknowledgement. You did what you came to do. Outside, Mercer ducked into the shadows of the courthouse steps, folder raised to block the cameras. A few reporters shouted questions. He said nothing. No comment, no eye contact. He just got in his car and drove away. Alone. Inside, Adrienne lingered in the corridor. Her phone buzzed. A message from her attorney. You won. Case closed. Delaney caught up with her moments later, coat over one arm, briefcase in the other. You could have asked for more money, you know. Adrienne didn't hesitate. It wasn't about the money. Delaney studied her. You think it'll make a difference? Adrienne looked toward the glass doors of the courthouse, the reflection of her uniform in the pane. I don't know, she said, but maybe next time he stops someone, he'll hesitate. A week later, the Toledo Police Department announced Mercer's suspension pending internal review. The official memo used clinical terms. Policy failure, behavioral reassessment, ongoing inquiry, but the truth echoed louder through the hallways. He wasn't shielded anymore. The badge no longer made him untouchable. Some whispered he'd be reassigned. Others said his career was finished. Whatever the outcome, the message was clear. There are limits now. At Fort Wayne, Adrienne returned to work as if nothing had happened. She didn't give interviews. She didn't post a video recap. There were briefings to lead, logistics to organize, and soldiers who depended on her example more than her headlines. But something had changed beneath the surface, something unspoken yet deeply understood among her team. Leadership didn't always roar. Sometimes it stood silent in the storm. Sometimes it simply refused to back down. 2 months later, the courthouse dust had long settled, but its echo remained. There were no more cameras, no more folded arms in courtrooms, no more late-night calls from lawyers. Life had returned to its steady rhythm, on paper at least. At Fort Wayne, Lieutenant Colonel Adrienne Wallace walked the halls with the same calm purpose she always had. The ribbons on her chest remained neatly in place, but her soldiers didn't see her differently because of what had happened. They saw her more clearly. Quiet conversations began to shift. Younger officers stood straighter. Respect deepened, not from the lawsuit's outcome, but from the way she had carried it. She hadn't fought fire with fire. She hadn't screamed, begged, or turned her pain into spectacle. She had held her ground with the quiet precision of a soldier who understood that the battlefield isn't always made of sand and wire. It can be a sidewalk, a courtroom, or a question shouted through a car window at 11:15 p.m. On a rainy Friday morning, Adrienne stood before a group of new recruits in a modest classroom at Fort Wayne. Their uniforms were crisp, their boots fresh, their notebooks open. Most had only worn the uniform for a few weeks. They were young, eager, uncertain, idealistic. She didn't open with statistics or doctrine. She started with a question. How many of you believe that wearing a uniform automatically earns you respect? A few hands rose, some confident, some hesitant, others stayed still. Adri nodded. I get why you'd think that. When you wear these colors, you represent something larger than yourself. But let me tell you something I learned the hard way. Respect isn't given, it's earned, every day, with every choice. The room fell quiet. She paced slowly in front of them, not reading from notes, just speaking from somewhere deeper. Authority can feel like armor, a rank, a badge, a patch. It can make you feel protected, untouchable even. But that's not what authority is supposed to be. It's not armor. She paused, her voice steady. It's a burden. She let the silence hold that truth. No one moved. If you wear this uniform, she continued, and you don't carry it with honor, if you use it to intimidate, to silence, to control, then you don't deserve it. In the back, a young recruit sat a little straighter. Adrienne looked around the room. Her voice didn't rise, but her presence filled the space. 2 months ago, I was pulled over by an officer who didn't care who I was until he saw my rank. But that's not what changed the outcome. My rank didn't win that case. My integrity did. The truth did. The camera, the evidence, the calm. Those were my weapons. I didn't fight him. I didn't insult him. I stood firm. I told the truth, and I demanded accountability, not just for me, but for everyone like me. A long pause followed. No one looked away. That officer thought his badge made him powerful. But the moment I stood my ground, without shouting, without force, he realized something. Real power doesn't come from what's on your chest. It comes from how you carry yourself when no one's watching. The lesson landed not like a lecture, but like a quiet wave, slow, deep, and undeniable. Adrienne glanced down, closed the folder on the podium, and looked up one last time. Lead with honesty, serve with humility, and never forget, when you wear this uniform, you represent more than yourself. You represent every man and woman who ever wore it before you, and everyone who will wear it after. She stepped away from the front of the room. No applause. No fanfare, just understanding. That moment didn't go viral, but it lasted. And for those recruits, years from now, in war zones or on quiet streets in the middle of the night, it would be the voice they remembered, not because it was loud, but because it was true.